I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, come on, admit it. You believe in ghosts, or you want to believe in ghosts, and you like being afraid. You like that little thrill. You like that little chill that goes up in your spine when you think about the unnatural, the unknown. And for all we know, there is an unknown realm out there. Anything is possible in this world. Our next guest, Monique Gliozzi, has written a wonderful ghost story. It is called Vestige. We are delighted to have Monique on Spotlight again today. And we'd like to thank the folks at Sweet Spire Literature Management for helping us put Monique back in the spotlight. So glad to have you back on the show, Monique.
Thank you so much for having me again, Logan. I'm so looking forward to sharing things about Vestige and discussing this book and other aspects as well. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I hear you got a couple of ghosts in the background. So
I
full
do. Those are the
disclosure,
two little
the little
chihuahuas.
doggies barking are not mine. They're Monique's, but mine could bark at any moment too. So don't think this show is haunted. But let's start out with a question. Do you believe in ghosts?
I do, and the reason being is because I've had my own experiences with the spiritual world. I also believe in ghosts because, well, in the spiritual world because of my own sort of religion, being sort of Catholic. Um, but I never really had experiences until later in life. So I'm 52 now. So I started experiencing things when I was 38, 39, so quite late. Oftentimes you read about children experiencing, these paranormal phenomena at a very young age. But for me, it's kind of the reverse. So I'll probably just share a little
Yeah, I was going
anecdote
to
if
say,
you
I'm
want.
not going to let you go on that one. Tell me a little bit about your close encounter.
I've had a few experiences, and they haven't been threatening or horrible. But one in particular is actually related to aviation.
Mhm.
And one day I was doing a pre-flight inspection for to do a navigation exercise as part of my commercial pilot license training. And my exams were like literally, weeks away. So I was very keen to get my hours up and perfect my craft, so called.
Exactly.
Anyway, as you can imagine, the pilot is very pedantic, and you go around the entire aircraft and check everything. So I was doing my pre-flight. It was middle of the day. There were other people around. My aircraft was a sort of larger one, so it was positioned somewhere in the middle of the field, of the airfield. So away from the hangars, away from the airport. So off I went, and I suddenly smelled cigarette smoke,
Hmm.
which you wouldn't smell anywhere on an airfield, let alone, in the airport for obvious reasons. And I thought, oh, that's strange. I'm probably imagining it. And then I smelled this cologne. So there was a combination of cigarette smoke, tobacco smoke, and cologne.
Hmm.
And so I stopped what I was doing and I look up and I see this guy. He would have been in his 40s, dressed in mechanic overalls, but he wasn't an employee of the club because first of all it was a weekend, and so the actual engineers have their day off on the weekend, so he wasn't them. His outfit didn't match that of the club that I was flying with, and I could see him like crystal clear, like I'm seeing you now. And he just stood there and stared at me, not sort of in a menacing way, but just stood there. And I'm sort of thinking, okay. So I just sort of friendlily said, "Oh, hey, yeah, how you going?" kind of thing. And he didn't respond. He just looked at me. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to go about my business. So I continued pre-flighting and kept an eye on him. And as I got to one, how the fuel is in the wings, that's where the fuel is loaded in an
Mhm.
aircraft. So you sort of go and check everything underneath, um, around the little fuel sort of ports. And I noticed basically that there was a stain, a small stain, probably the size of my thumb. And so I'm touching the stain and it's moist. So I'm thinking there's a fuel leak. And I'm looking and the guy's still there.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of sort of thinking, okay, all right. So I found this. And literally, then I go to, how do you say, just pick a rag up that I was carrying with me and just sort of giving it a bit of a wipe and to have a bit of a closer look at it. Not that I was going to go flying in this aircraft now. And then disappeared. And I looked all around and he wasn't there. So it was seconds. So it's not like he could have, if he had been walking back to the club, basically, I would have seen him.
Right.
And there's no way he could have just kind of, walked away without me seeing him. So he disappeared. So I thought to myself, okay, so either you're going crazy and your mind's playing tricks on you because you've got an important exam coming up, or you've experienced something quite special. Now, I'd like to think that I've experienced something incredible because obviously this stain was a small stain. It was in a corner of the lower part of the wing. So if you hadn't looked and been pedantic, you may have missed it. So I'm thinking, I think he was trying to just warn me. So I didn't tell my instructor anything because he probably would have thought, oh, she's losing the plot. So, but it was interesting. Yeah. So that's something that stuck in my mind. And I've also had other experiences like at the hospital that I work at, like a matron, a nurse basically sort of walking the halls of a certain part of the hospital and kind of sitting in meetings, Zoom meetings actually, while, she's kind of, you just feel that sense. So this was the first time that I actually had an experience in two sensory modalities, sight and smell. Right. So that was really kind of unique to me. So yes, that's long-winded, but I do believe in ghosts.
No, it's very, very interesting. And I think most people have had some kind of inexplicable encounter such as that, which is why ghost stories capture our imagination. Now, for the folks at home who are just tuning in, Monique is also a psychiatrist in addition to being an author and a pilot. So let me ask you a little bit about the psychology of fear. Why do people like being afraid? You purposely read the book, you go in to see the movie, you get on the roller coaster ride, you bungee jump, you do all of these things. I mean, bungee jumping and roller coasters might be different, but people like the idea of something they don't understand that spooks them.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that when for example, we're talking about maybe scary movies and urban legends and things like that. So firstly, I think people like a bit of a thrill, and I think they like to experience entertainment and a bit of a threat within the safety of the confines of their own home or their cinema. So and it also gives them an outlet to either identify with the villain without too many consequences, or with the victim that's being targeted. In terms of at a sort of biological level, if you think about your own emotions when you're watching a movie, a scary movie, there's that sort of, tension that builds up in your body, and sometimes your throat even gets dry because you're probably empathizing with, the target. And so, and then basically there might be a little moment of reprieve where something humorous happens. Sometimes in scary movies, you have the really horror bit, and then there's a little snippet of humor that kind of breaks that sort of torment, if you will, right. And then you go back to the horror. So at a biological level, we have basically a bit of a fight-flight response, a bit like when someone's having a panic attack. And so chemicals in the brain are released, are discharged. So the adrenaline basically gets you going, and you're sort of thinking, oh my gosh, get away, and keeps that tension going. And then you get the dopamine and the endorphins, basically, that give you sort of that sense of reprieve and pleasure when, things work in someone's favor, or, something is resolved. So you get almost that sort of, rush and excitement with that then sort of calming of the brain through the dopamine and endorphins. And, you sort of kind of it gives you that sort of the down of that roller coaster ride. So that's what's happening at a biological level. And a lot of people like that. And sometimes people like it because, there isn't an awful lot of action happening in their life. I mean, if we think about it, the way the world is at the moment with inflation, we all have to, work really hard. Some people, bless them, have to get, two jobs, and it's hard. And sometimes it's nice to unwind with something thrilling like a scary movie that gives you that sort of healthy, I would say healthy outlet. It's better than taking stimulants and all these other sort of things. But also, I was thinking about this the other day when I was driving home. I guess one has to think about, what does an actual horror movie represent to the individual person, but also more globally to society. So it's almost like sometimes there's a theme to, well, oftentimes there's a theme to a horror movie that um, where that explores society's fears about something, like, for example, I don't know, zombies, or the world ending, or something terrible like that. And again, sort of watching a scary movie with these kinds of themes will allow the person to kind of um, work through their concerns or their anxieties about the worst that can happen in the world. That's just an example. But when I watch a scary movie, I'm kind of how do you say, a bit sort of critical. I think that, and not in a bad way, in a good way, because for me, a good scary movie you need some violence, you need some gore, you need some psychological sort of enticement, but you also need suspense. And for me, suspense is the key. Because it really sort of cements everything and glues everything together. That the theme and the scenes sort of together. An example that came to mind was Jaws. You remember Jaws, the very first one? That was
Sure.
scary as anything, because you didn't see the creature until he, popped up, almost towards the end of the movie. That
Right.
was probably due to technical problems, but that aside, it was scary. You had this vast ocean, you didn't know where he was, and it was really the score, the music, that kept you going. So
Yeah.
suspense for me is the key to a good story.
Absolutely. And the mystery, you didn't
And
see
mystery.
the shark and it just pulled the girl underneath the water. That was
Yeah.
like the first scene. She's wading in
Yeah.
water and pulled down. And the music, of course, there probably is no more visceral movie going experience than to see a horror movie. If you're in a theater, everybody's screaming, yelling often at the same time. So it becomes like a shared experience. It is kind of fun as well. And also, horror movies tend to be morality tales. Generally, the
Exactly.
people who do bad are punished. So there's some kind of, appeals to our, I guess, our morality a little bit there. The people who lie, the people who cheat, the people who are promiscuous tend to get murdered in these movies. Let me ask you about our senses. Do you think we have more than five senses? Do you think that there is something beyond, sight, smell, sound, touch?
Absolutely. In fact, just sort of, if we sort of think about the statistics, so sort of globally, about 42% of people worldwide have had some sort of experience with a ghostly encounter, oftentimes through, not just sight, but also touch.
Mhm.
That's quite common. And obviously, it makes a great tale at the dinner table or at a party. But so I definitely believe that there is more, and there's such a fine line between what we have here, what we experience here as mortals, to what's on the other side. And sometimes that's why you have people who, in my opinion, people who are interested in the paranormal, like the scientists and psychiatrists, psychologists, and paranormal investigators, is because they want to find the truth, and that's
Mm.
really what sort of drives people to um, you know those who believe in ghosts, to basically find the truth. And sometimes the truth is linked to a tragic past, and sometimes we can actually learn from the truth of a past. For example, if you go to I don't know about you, Logan, but I like to travel, and when I travel, I like to learn about the place that I'm staying at, and the history of it. And all over the world, including the US, there's great tales of haunted sugarcane fields, and
Mm.
castles and towers and battlefields. And it gives us an opportunity to learn about history, and it also gives me a sense of nostalgia of what happened in the past, and how
Mm.
can we make things better? How can we prevent the past from repeating itself? But
Absolutely.
as a child, I remember being dragged along to these places by my parents and having to basically, sit through, walking through all these palaces. But whenever I heard a ghost story, oh, I pricked up my ears, and I was very, very intrigued. So, for example, like Hampton Court Palace in the UK, there's stories about Jane Seymour, one of Henry VIII's wives who died after childbirth, so she wasn't beheaded, one of the few, still wandering the halls, in distress. So yeah, so basically that's kind of what my belief, and I certainly, I stand by it.
Absolutely. And we're going to segue to your book now because you kind of touched on the topic I was going to get to. I think most of the ghostly encounters come from the dead or the recently dead communicating with the living. I know when my mother passed, I had vivid dreams about her that seemed like they were more than dreams, and she was communicating with me. So, whether it's a dream, whether that's a ghost, whether it's a spirit, whether that's a message from the other world, that's for anyone to figure out. But that's what Vestige is all about. A young woman comes into her psychologist's office and leaves behind a diary. He doesn't recognize her at first, and then he realizes that she was a patient long ago when she was a child. And as he reads through the diary, he starts learning about this woman. And he also simultaneously just about learns that she died days earlier. And it's a chilling start, and it's a wonderful ghost story. And tell me a little bit about the process of how you came up with this story and how you wrote it.
So when I was doing my book launch for my first two books, so Foresight and Hunted, someone asked, so are you writing another book? And I wanted to write a ghost story, and I had the title Vestige, which actually means remnants of something that was once there, so like a ruin. And I decided, when I got home, I decided if I write a ghost story, I want to write something unique that is, starts off with a huge bang, but also leaves someone with the reader with a message, a take-home message. So I chose to write a diary in a diary format, but obviously, have the diary being almost like a main protagonist, if you will. Mm-hmm. And the psychologist who's reading this diary become more and more engrossed to the point where it's becoming more and more obsessed. Mm-hmm. So the diary is about the encounters that this young girl whom he was treating many, many years ago had, and he was treating her for an anxiety disorder. But he never really learned the truth of and nature of the trigger for this anxiety until now reading the diary. So he becomes more and more obsessed, and he starts to learn about her, but he also starts to learn about himself because it brings back memories from the past. So this book is really about human vulnerability. It's about truth. It's about empathy. It's if you think about it movie wise, it's kind of like the Sixth Sense meets Sometimes They Come Back. Stephen King, Sometimes They Come Back. So it's multifaceted. So at face value, just talking about it now, it seems, oh yeah, okay, it's fairly straightforward. But as you read the book, you start to see the parallels between the main protagonists. So Olivia, the girl, the lady now who's dead, and her psychologist, Maxwell Stein. And he basically starts to experience also some paranormal events, and he questions his own sanity. And his son, with whom he's holidaying in the Hamptons, can see his dad change his demeanor before his eyes. He's becoming obsessed, he's starting to drink, and things are really starting to unravel. And he feels helpless. Sean, his son, feels helpless because he doesn't know who to turn to and what to do. I won't say anymore because
exactly. We don't want to give it away.
But yeah, but it's I like it because it kind of, like all my books, it sort of starts off with a bang, and you just kind of keep going. It just propels the reader along, and it's short, it's fast paced, and so if you want to read a couple of chapters before going to bed with a nice hot cup of cocoa, you'll get through it and then can pick it up the next evening and not think, oh, hang on a second, who was there and what happened there? So it's kind of pretty straightforward and entertaining.
It is. It's very entertaining. And you alluded to this before, that it's not just a story, it's a storytelling. And the storytelling is very effective because it's simultaneously told in third person and first person, because you have that diary aspect. And it's kind of an intriguing dialogue you have going on, even though it's basically a monologue between the doctor and the patient, because he's hearing from her what he never heard before.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. And he sort of begs, he asks himself the question, well, why now? And
Yeah.
the reader will find out and will can draw their own conclusions as they go through the story. But oftentimes, even as a psychiatrist, I sort of, when a patient comes to us and we see them distressed, and we sort of wonder, we make a diagnosis, or we make an initial assessment with a preliminary diagnosis.
Mhm.
And not everyone who hears voices is crazy. There are people who hear voices who, because they have a certain antenna and link with the spiritual world, as we talked about earlier, but also culturally, indigenous people, they have their own experiences, like you mentioned earlier, when people pass,
Mhm.
sometimes the deceased person comes back to visit or gives them messages from beyond. That's
Mhm.
culturally quite, appropriate and acceptable. So to make a diagnosis of a major psychiatric disorder, there are a whole host of factors. There's, a conglomerate of symptoms, a bunch of triggers, a bunch of environmental factors intermixed with genetic factors that we still don't understand. So it is a fine line, and sometimes patients are worried about telling us about their experiences because they think, well, they're going to think that I'm a little loopy and going to lock me up. So I think
Exactly.
as a psychiatrist, it's really important to be able to distinguish one from the other and have an understanding of that fifth sort of dimension, rather than just be concrete in what's happening in this world, even though that usually takes up most of our energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you found your next horror story or ghost story to write. It can be a patient who's diagnosed as a schizophrenic who really is hearing and seeing the images and the voices, right?
I could do that.
I'm sure you've got a lot of real life examples you can model it off
Yes.
of as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think this would be a terrific movie. In fact, my advice to you would be to produce this as a film short for the festival circuit first, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. I think it's, like you said, it's a simple story, so it could be condensed, and I think it would still be very effective. It's amazing what a good director can do in a short amount of time. But whether it's a short film or a feature-length film, have you thought about it as a movie? Have you visualized it at all?
I have thought about it as a movie, and there is a short cinematic trailer that
Mhm.
has been done. Michael DeWild was a producer, and he formulated that with real actors.
Mhm.
And it basically has been submitted to several film festivals and has, won the best, I think, short trailer or something for horror movie at the Swedish International Film Festival. But I've also had some nominations by some other festivals as well, honorable nominations. So it's had some success. So I think my next step would be to, venture into a longer sort of feature film.
Mhm.
And but again, that's always a process, and so
Yeah,
one has to just be patient and have a bit of
exactly.
faith that things will work out.
Yeah. It's a very, like I said, it's a very visual uh work. So I do see that as a film, and I think that the good twists in there also would make it very, very enjoyable for the viewer. Tell me
Yeah.
what you're working on now. You mentioned you've been traveling, you've been in
Yes.
where were you again?
Tasmania.
Tasmania. I was going to say
Tasmania.
Tasmanian devils came to mind. You found a little inspiration in Tasmania, as I understand it.
Yes. So it was cold and it was very, very wet. It rained 95% of the time, but when the sun did shine, that was beautiful. So Tasmania is a beautiful place to visit. So anyone who's interested in rural, really sort of nice, sort of luscious rural Australia, go to Tasmania. So on my travels, on the way there, on the plane, basically, I wasn't really interested in listening to music or watching any of the entertainment, and just kind of like looked out the window and allowed my mind to wander. And I had a little kernel of an idea, and I just got more ideas, just started jotting them down. And during my travels in Tasmania, I got more ideas. So I've kind of formulated the actual story. So an action thriller with obviously psychological, not paranormal, but just strong psychological theme. And it's called Hidden. I'm still sort of toying about the subtitle, but that's kind of what I'm sort of looking at starting to work on. I won't say any more. I think
Okay.
you might have an inkling of where the idea is coming from
Sounds
based on
great.
our previous conversations.
Now, you do have a number of books out, and people can learn more about them on your website, which I believe is moniquegliozzi.com, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And that's
Yes.
where they can also watch the trailers of some of your works. In fact, every book more or less has a trailer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A
Yeah.
trailer and a screenplay and a treatment. So yeah.
Wonderful.
So
So
it's
they
quite
keep you,
interactive.
what's that?
It's quite an interactive sort of website. It's very expansive, and it can also tell you where to buy them, mostly on Amazon, but there are other places. It's Vestige is the only book that is in also available as an audiobook. So it's available in hard copy, paperback, as well as ebook, Kindle, and as an audiobook. So my editor said, why don't you get it, put it in an audiobook format, because that will, people sometimes don't have time to read, they like to listen. So I thought a ghost story audiobook, yeah, that works.
Yeah. I think that's great. I was going to talk to you a little bit about your book and the characters of Olivia and Max. Do you sometimes feel a little bit like Max, like you don't realize the impact you've had on your patient's life? I mean, because there are hundreds of patients and one doctor. So in many ways, you're more important to them than they are to you. I don't mean to, I hope I'm phrasing that correctly, but for them to go see a doctor, to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, it's sometimes quite a soul-bearing experience.
Yeah, it is. And the most important thing is to develop a trust with that patient early on. And it's not easy sometimes, especially if you have to, on your first assessment, you have to admit the person to the hospital because they're so unwell. There's no way you can contain things in the community. So, but developing trust, and then once they get better, with treatment, um, it is. I always ask, am I actually doing the right thing? Not because I'm negligent, but it's more about, am I respecting the patient's wishes enough?
Mm.
Because they do have rights, and am I doing what I can for this patient? And I mean, I'm human, I'm gonna
Sure.
not be perfect.
Yeah.
I always question myself because I like to keep myself in check. It's almost like, the that sort of strict parent says, "Oh, really? Are you sure you've done everything? You sure you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's?" So I do like to sort of question myself in a sometimes in a bit of a harsh way, but but I think that mostly I I do make some level of difference, and sometimes it's hard to gauge how much difference. I mean, obviously we see the patient get better,
Yeah.
but then you see them relapse, and you're like, oh gosh, okay, should have done something different. What could I have been more assertive with, making sure they're taking their meds and send the nurse out more frequently? So there's always that question as a clinician, and but for me, I've learned over time that if I can sleep at night, then that's a good thing. Then I've done a good day's work. If I can't, then I'm worrying about things, and I need to ask why that is. So, but I'm a bit of a worrier anyway, so sometimes I just worry. So it is what it is.
As all of us can be. But yeah, because Max, it seems, was never able to break through to Olivia completely to the point where she trusted him enough to tell him what was going on in her life.
Yeah, and that's crucial. Even though he had a very gentle approach,
Mhm.
and she was a child, so obviously you treat children and interact with them differently. You want to interact with them at their level. But yeah, he never could quite do that. However, because she appeared to be getting better and appeared to be learning strategies to managing her anxiety, so in his mind, well, she's doing okay. She's, and was able to then discharge her from his care, as she sort of developed, unbeknownst to him.
The name of the book is Vestige. It is written by Monique Gliozzi. You can learn more about this book and all of her other books and all of her other work on her website, moniquegliozzi.com. It's been fascinating talking with her about the topic of ghosts and the supernatural. And I'm going to ask you one more question as a bonus question, because you kind of alluded to this before yourself. Now, as Catholics, you're Catholic, I'm Catholic, we believe in the Holy Spirit. We believe in the spirit and souls of individuals. But the Catholic Church also recognizes the devil. There's the, I don't think it's a sacrament, but there's a rite of exorcism. Do you believe in the devil or Satan, or is this just a manifestation of evil? What are your thoughts?
So I do believe in the devil. I believe in evil. I'm not sure. I've never witnessed any sort of possessions, demonic possessions, even though I'm sure people have experienced them and have undergone exorcisms. It's not something that I really sort of have delved into. But I do believe in, in evil forces and negative forces and negative energies. Nowadays people talk about negative energies, and you can sort of think about, well, that's kind of devilish. So I do believe, and I certainly, even though I've had experiences with ghosts, I don't go looking for them or doing seances or anything like that, because that's just opening a portal up to, problems. So definitely I believe, but I kind of acknowledge, and I do what I need to do to protect myself and stay kind of clear of anything sort of, that could potentially latch on and be harmful.
Right. Well, it's very interesting. As a news reporter for decades, I can tell you there is evil, obviously, in the world, and people who certainly fit the bill of being possessed or demonic or Satan-like. That is for sure. The book is wonderful. It's called Vestige. It's highly recommended. It's written by Monique Gliozzi, and we are delighted to have her as a guest here today on Spotlight. Thanks so much for joining us, Monique.
Thank you so much for having me, Logan. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Same here. Lots of fun going through all these topics. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.